Celine? Thumbs up. Yeah. All right.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi, we're about to start. Hello, hello. Hi, guys. Hello and welcome. Woo! We're all very excited. Hello and welcome to this wonderful, wonderful conversation, Queering Desire and Intimacy. I'm Céline Tshika. I'm going to be guiding this conversation. And yeah, let's just start with introducing who these wonderful authors are. So I'm just going to go in this kind of order. So first we have Azille Coetzee. Azille is a postdoctoral researcher in gender and decolonization at the Center for Historical Trauma and Transformation at Stellenbosch University. This is her third book, right? That's been published. Yeah. Snap, snap, snap. Next up, we have Kopano Maroga, who they are a performance artist, writer, cultural worker, and co-founding director of the socio-cultural arts organization Anybody Zine. And last and certainly not least, we have Alistair Mackay, a South African novelist, short story writer, and columnist. His debut novel, It Doesn't Have to Be This Way, was chosen by Brizzle Paper as one of the 100 notable African books of 2022.
Yeah.
And was longlisted for both the 2023 British Science Fiction Association Awards for Best Novel, just in case you didn't know, and the 2023 Sunday Times Literary Awards for Best Fiction. Well done. Oh my God. Accomplished. Oh, okay, great. So Azille, I would just love to introduce just the general broad summary thesis statement of your book for people who don't know. Would you care to just share what Desire at the End of the White Line is about?
Sure, thanks Celine. And just to, my bio was a bit outdated.
I'm sorry, I did a bad
just
job.
To correct that, I'm a research fellow at the philosophy department of Stellenbosch University.
Oh, glorious.
Just, yeah.
Okay, cool.
For technical, whatever.
Yes, please, thank you.
Okay. So my latest book was about me asking myself really, as a white woman living in Cape Town, why is my life still so white? Why are my friends so white? Why are the spaces in which I move still so white? And so many people I know have the same problem so the feeling that we want to change how we live, but somehow we are stuck in very old patterns that we keep repeating the past in our lives, and to ask why, what is it, even if we want to change. And then I started looking at the realm of the super intimate and the personal, and looking at how we replicate political patterns and spatial patterns through the things that feel most intimate and that feel most personal, like who we have sex with, who we desire, what we want, and how we spend our time and who we care for. And so the book is kind of exploring that in a personal but also then a theoretical level at how these most personal, intimate ways in which we live determine our political stance in the world and place in the world.
All right, thank you. You did a great job of weaving in the personal with that academic and theoretical. It was a really lovely read. Kopano.
Yeah.
Tell us about Jesus' Thesis and Other Critical Fabulations.
Sure.
Great title, stunning.
Thank you. Jesus' Thesis is a poetry collection. I started it, officially, I started it as part of my master's in theatre and performance at the University of Cape Town. And so it started out as a performance, and I had a relationship with the publisher, Nick Mulgrew. I had written for his literary journal, what is it called? I forget, Proofrock. Yeah, we know that one. I'd written for that before, and so we were in conversation a lot, also because I ran this organization, Anybody Zine. We published a lot of zines, and so I would just, kind of ask him how he does what he does, and that's kind of how we started up a rapport. But the book and the research I was very interested as a dancer in this concept of the ecstatic, so how you can raise a certain kind of state through often repetitive movement, very cardiovascularly intensive movement can really create like a highness or a headiness. And the only other place that I'd experienced that was in the church. So I'm gay for God. And I was just interested in those two things in the beginning. And because what I do is so bodily, of course, then like the corporality of it came into it as well. And it became a bit of basically in the research, there was this image that kept recurring in the video that I was taking of the kind of Venus de Milo, but in my body. And I was like, ooh, isn't that interesting? I'm very much not her. But, but it kind of looks like her. And then I became very interested in these things that can elicit similar responses while being very different things, right? So you have like the dance and the spirituality. You have my body looking like the Venus de Milo, and I became very interested in this. And that led me to a field, various fields, biomythography, which is coined by Audre Lorde, critical fabulation by Saidiya Hartman, and what do you call this? Comparative mythology, which is kind of, comparing different mythological and religious systems. And it became a really interesting metaphor for this idea of something that creates the same experience but looks different depending on its context. And that became really interesting, considering what would it mean for Jesus to be a black, queer, trans, non-binary, XXXXX, and what would that produce? And trying to splice as well the sacred and the sacrilegious, which also kind of, they both induce this ecstatic experience. Being in sacred spaces, being in supposedly sacrilegious or desire-oriented spaces, like cruising in parks and gay saunas. So I was quite interested if these things could live together. And that's basically what this is, this kind of like pastiche of things that shouldn't be together, but produce similar kinds of sensations. That was not as succinct as you, but that's fine.
No, I loved it. Loved every minute of it. Thank you. Alistair.
Sure.
Yeah.
So my latest book is The Lucky Ones. It's a short story collection, so it's my third book, and it came together from stories that I've been working on for a few years. So it's kind of half planned and half unplanned. I guess I write short stories all the time. I find it really calming, I suppose, to write short stories. And so I started building up quite a collection, and then I wanted to put together a collection. And so then there were certain gaps that I wanted to fill, and so then I started writing towards filling those gaps. I like short stories that aren't too samey, so the stories are quite diverse, but I think there are a lot of themes that come through in a lot of them. Insiders and outsiders is a big one. It's kind of partially why it's called The Lucky Ones. And then there's a lot about queer intimacy in this book. There's like a gay multiracial couple that's trying to make it work and really struggling to hear each other and understand each other. There's a story about a mom who thinks her child might be trans. So there's a lot of, that's the joy of a short story collection, right? Is that there's so much variety and you can look at so many different lives and so many people and so many different experiences. And I wanted to have that feeling of dropping into this life and grappling with this feeling and then moving on and then trying out another life. Hopefully in a way that as you read the collection, you build up a sense of queer community, queer love, how we're finding ways to find each other and find joy.
That's really lovely and great summary. I think that what I really liked about reading all of these three books was how specific it was to the South African context, and that was just really interesting as a reader of queer work, to see something that's so specific to being queer in South Africa, and I'd really love to talk more about that. But you touched on this now with the title. I like things like poetry books and short story collections because it makes me feel like it's a musician who released an album, and I'm looking for the title track and I'm like, ooh, what does that mean? What is it? And so I really enjoyed, I rushed to those. It was so hard not to just start with The Lucky Ones. But
that was an argument I had with my publisher, right? Because she was like, we need to start with the title story. I'm like, no, it must be the third story.
Yeah,
exactly.
Good call. It kept me sat. I was on the edge of my seat, like, when am I going to get to this one? So I'd love to just kind of zone in on that one and how you came about choosing that title and how you kind of oriented the rest of the collection around that.
Sure. So there's a story called The Lucky Ones in this collection, and in that story, Andile, he's a gay person in Cape Town, he keeps being told he keeps experiencing all these microaggressions throughout his day, and he keeps being told by people how lucky he is, not that things aren't worse, right? Like that he's not experiencing, more homophobia, or that it's easier for your generation than for previous generations. And he starts getting so irritated with people telling him over and over again how lucky he is, and he doesn't feel lucky. He feels quite lonely, and he feels like he hasn't been able to make things work with the person that he was hoping things would work out with. And he's feeling a little bit stuck, and he's sort of trying to be celebratory, and he's trying to go clubbing all the time, but he's feeling very empty and hollow. And then something happens. He goes to his parents' house for his father's birthday party, and something happens there that kind of flips how he feels. The more I thought about it, and then he does kind of feel lucky by the end of that story. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought about the fact that is a theme that just is woven through a lot of my stories. Like I said, it almost came to me in reverse order, because I think this idea of he says, is it lucky, to be treated like a human being, or is that not just like the basics that we can expect from one another? So this idea of it's so wonderful to feel lucky, and it's so wonderful to feel chosen, but also it's quite like a problematic category of what is lucky versus what is what we just owe each other as human beings.
Yeah.
And I think it also speaks to this idea of insiders and outsiders, which I think comes through in a lot of these stories. Who are the people we listen to? What are the stories that we read? What kind of lives are more visible than other lives? And just the random luck of the lives that we're born into. I didn't deserve to be born into the life that I was born into versus someone who had a much harder time than I did.
Yeah. Great. That's a great theme that kind of comes through across all of these, and I'm going to come back to Kopano on the mythology one. Oh, spoiler. But for Azille, I wanted to focus on desire. The choice to unpack not just white supremacy but queerness. Through the conduit of desire. How did you come about choosing that, and what is the importance of that you want to communicate to people?
Yeah. So I think. Drink down.
Now we're getting serious.
So I think the more I looked at my life and my history and the way I was raised and people around me, and read about apartheid, the more I realized that, and I've been reading extensively other scholars, it's not me who thought this up, that apartheid was just as much about race as it is about sex. Because if you want to create a pure race and you want to keep it separate it's really important who's sleeping with who. So much of apartheid violence and regulation was about policing and disciplining sex and desire and keeping people apart, which is not something that happens naturally. I mean, if people are in close proximity, they want one another. And so it's for example, the first two laws that were promulgated in 1949 with the start of apartheid was about regulating, prohibiting mixed marriages and sex between people from different races. So then it really is, if we are asking about remaking ourselves in a post-apartheid South Africa, if it is about starting to live differently, if it's about white Afrikaners starting to become part of South Africa in a more authentic and bigger way, then it is about looking at our sex lives and looking at, because it's been instilled in us so strongly who we're supposed to want, especially as white Afrikaner women. The men still can, they can do their thing, but if the white Afrikaner woman, if I'm not having the white baby, then the folk cannot exist. So there's a real anxiety about the sexuality of the white Afrikaner woman. And we see that, for example, if you start looking on television, if you start looking in popular culture, you see almost no depictions of white Afrikaans women sleeping with or marrying either black men or other women, because it's so important to keep orientating the white Afrikaner woman towards the white Afrikaner man, or at least the white man then. So then the question is about, but what do I want? And what if I want differently? And what are the implications of that for my life and for my family and for my people, so to speak? And then desire becomes this very interesting force with absolute world-making capacity and potential.
That's wonderful. I feel like I have like 18 new questions at this point. I just wanna...
Sorry.
Okay. So I want to talk about like stories, right? As a concept, mythology, and stories that we tell ourselves as human beings. And starting with the obvious one, the religious one, the Jesus thesis. Look, bold start to a collection, a poetry collection. I was like, oh, okay. How did you come about that, and how important? I guess, what is the relationship with religion that informed, exploring, love and queerness through religious imagery and metaphors? Yeah, I just want to know about how that came about.
I mean, I just love what Azille was saying about desire, because I was thinking about this concept of desire lines in design. So the concept of like where people walk as opposed to where the pavement is, and how that literally makes a world. Like it literally has a material impact. And I guess in that sense, the idea behind mythology came in, I think maybe similarly to what Azille was talking about in terms of, there's a certain mythology around what you were talking about, the white Afrikaner woman with the white Afrikaner man. And Christianity specifically has been such an important part of that whole framework.
Absolutely.
So it's almost, I don't know what comes first. Is it the politic or the religious belief? Do they inform one another? But this idea, I mean, during apartheid, there were certain passages in the Bible that was used to infer that there should be a separation between the races, the son of Ham, and the rest of it. And so that became an important way of thinking of world making and considering, or what was interesting was that, so Venus de Milo came from nowhere, but then I was interested in what does this figure represent, because I'm also an astrologer. So it was like, this is what's interesting about astrology is that the planets named after these Roman gods have these attributions that is about people collecting thousands of years of data sets, looking at the events on Earth and looking at the events in the sky and making correlations, and I find that quite interesting. And Carl Jung, who's this psychoanalyst who developed this whole kind of system of psychoanalytics that's based on mythology, proposed that mythologies are some kind of primordial, almost shared consciousness, right? That we have these similar stories in different places in the world of how the world came into being, or divine feminine and divine masculine and the rest of it. But what became interesting was looking at the goddesses that Venus is descended from, or is related to. So you have Isis, who's an Egyptian goddess, the kind of mother goddess. You have Ishtar and Inanna from the Sumerian Empire or the Babylonian Empire. And what was quite interesting about Inanna, so this came very like sideways, which I love about artistic research. Like it guides you, right? So I was doing this workshop with Chani Nicholas. All the astrology girls will know who I'm talking about. Chani's this amazing astrologer, and she does these workshops where she was focusing on this event, this astrological event, Venus retrograde, where Venus looks like it's moving in the opposite direction from the perspective of Earth. And there's a whole mythology attached to Venus retrograde of the goddess Inanna going down to what would be the kind of Sumerian hell, where her sister is the queen, and she's struck dead, and she's hung from a hook, and she's flayed. And basically, it's a mythology that is trying to talk about the dark side of desire and how to integrate that darkness. And I found that quite interesting, that this figure, Venus, that we associate with all these lovely qualities is descended from a goddess who has darker implications. And the mythology is also quite interesting because the way that Inanna is sometimes represented in some sculptures is as like a voluptuous woman with an enormous penis. And I was like, this is delicious. Because she was the goddess of love and fertility, but also war, right? And then you have Venus, who comes much later, who is the goddess of love and fertility, and her consort Ares or Mars is the god of war, right? So they make the separation between the feminine is for fertility and the masculine is for war, right? And I was really interested if I can take inspiration from this idea of a kind of mythological being that was seen as the most desirable entity, who is represented as what we might call trans or might call genderqueer or intersex or something outside of the cis kind of binary, and this is the most desirable figure but also the most feared figure. I found this quite an interesting story to work with in terms of how we deal with intimacy today and queerness, where it's like, if you're a gay boy, you have to go to the gym and you have to have muscles and you have to be so beautiful. So I found it quite interesting to consider that representations of beauty and desire have been so queer, what we might say today, throughout history, and how do we make that an applied mythology, right? How do we take that and actually use it for kind of architecting our desire today? Because I think that's what stories can do, right? Yeah.
That was beautiful. Thank you. That was for me, and that was not for you guys. So, Azille, I wanted to focus on, you mentioned I've never said it out loud, so if I say it wrong, please forgive me, the Carnegie Report.
Yes,
okay.
That's right.
It's something that I just learned about through this book, and how much of the colonial project was actually written down somewhere, and not just like we'll just figure it out along the way, and how much that informed gender roles and sexuality. And I'd love for you to just expand on that and how that kind of inspired, because it's at the beginning of the book that you mentioned, and like is a great springboard for the rest of your analysis. So for those who don't know, would you please share?
Yeah, so it's so interesting if you, so in the early 1900s, just after the Second South African War, the Afrikaner people they weren't even a coherent group then, but kind of the group of settlers who loosely identified with that name were extremely poor because they lost the war against the English, and there were droughts and all kinds of things. And so then some men in the Afrikaner circle started an active program of financially uplifting. So there's a whole story. Also, the Afrikaners then joined forces with the British, which was the colonial power that won the war and whatever. But then there was an active program to uplift the Afrikaner people economically, to get them to middle class status. And this is where class comes into this picture, because the Afrikaners who were poor were then living they were moving to the cities to work, to the mines to work, and then they were living in very close proximity to black people and brown people. And then what happens when people are close to one another? People start sleeping and making families together and whatever. So, and then there was that fear of losing whiteness, of the Afrikaner slipping out of whiteness. So there's this whole program, a very active program of social engineering to get the Afrikaner to middle class status so that they can be kept apart from black people and brown people who were poorer because they were economically oppressed in the system. And part of that program, and then they commissioned they got social scientists. There was lots of money from America. Actually, the Americans sponsored it because they had something similar with the poor whites in America. So the history is extremely interesting. And they commissioned, put lots of money into research where social scientists started to look at what's the problem. And a big part of uplifting the Afrikaner to middle class status was about disciplining them into proper gender norms. There's 5 volumes of research, and the one is literally the Afrikaner family and mother or something like that. And it's about that women must be doing women's work, and men must be the breadwinners, women must be at home and care for the children. So there's a proper gendered comportment that goes with middle class life, that goes with a separate kind of whiteness. So as soon as, and then promiscuity among the younger Afrikaner women who would move to the cities to go work, that was immediately seen as racially deviant. So sexual deviance is read as potential racial deviance. So really the middle classness, whiteness, and proper heterosexuality and binary gender norms are so interlinked in making the white nation. And so that is what is so deeply programmed into our bodies and cells and erotic imaginations. And that's what gets interesting when we start, accessing other kinds of desires. Then it literally brings this entire kind of house of cards down. Yeah. So,
that's so interesting. I say that seriously. I want to keep talking about it. But I really enjoyed, I guess the nuance that came through in all of your books, right? They were not, particularly the characters that you chose, particularly yourself as a character through how you were sharing, weaving in your personal stories, the imperfections that you put into those characters. It was such a great picture of the current South African experience. And I think that I was really enlightened by how much race had to do with deconstructing gender roles and queerness. And it's such a great read for it. I would 10 out of 10 recommend. 11 out of 10. But I wanted to chat about, I guess, white queerness, right? I think that a lot of, we live in this media, where we see what we see, and a lot of it is under white supremacy. So there's kind of a struggle and a purposeful intention on centering people of color in the queer space. I wanted you to read a little bit of an excerpt, Kopano, of the ode to Brandon Cody.
Love.
So fantastic. So just the, I wouldn't say just the, but just the one page.
Gorgeous,
Yeah,
gorgeous.
the first view.
I just need to find it.
Oh.
You would never believe that I wrote this book.
In mine it's on page 56, if you want to throw it there.
Oh, that would be amazing. Sorry, I've got the German translation, but it has the English in there, and I thought that it would be so much easier, but it really wasn't.
So are we about to read in German right now?
Sweet 56. Brandon, paragon of pleasure, palimpsest of youth's eternal flower, polemic portent of vociferous longing. There are few things more quintessentially growing up gay on Tumblr than the image of gay porn star Brandon Cody on his knees, eyes heavenwards, getting a facial from Marshall. A Eucharist for one. This, our unholy iconography, this, our baby Jesus and Madonna, him on his knees in worship, his eyes aglow as the cum rains manna-like from Marshall's cock. The Lord be with you, and also with you. Brandon, moniker of gay disciplehood, Brandon, brown-haired and tan-skinned, Brandon, white and unfettered by preference and positionality, Brandon, patron saint of the six-packed and green-eyed, Brandon, when I realized I could never be you, all I wanted was to have you, Brandon, you are there in every sexual encounter and I want them all back, Brandon, true north, Brandon, statue of David, Brandon, creation of Adam, Brandon, apocryphal Adonis. I told my therapist, I feel like my sexual flower is wilting. And besides it hearkening back to that image of the rose wilting under the glass in Beauty and the Beast, a pantomime of time and disrepair, it was accurate. With enough exposure, anything will decay. There is something in me that is wilted. There is something in me that refuses to bloom again. Brandon, I want to tell you that there are few images more beautiful in my adolescent memory than you in that solitary rainstorm. Brandon, I cannot tell you how indescribably sad that makes me. Brandon, there is a secret flower somewhere in this world. Brandon, I don't know if I will ever find it. And it comes with a collage.
Wow. So glad I asked you to read that one. So I think what I wanted to kind of draw on with this one is the white representation, the white beauty in that, how that's the standard, and how, as a writer, how have you found yourself decentering that and centering yourself as a black queer body in the context of South Africa.
Wow, hectic. I mean, I think I would love to hear what Alistair has to say about this because of the short story.
Yes.
But I think for me personally, I'm going to be so real, guys. I think a lot of it has had to do with being really conscious about, like Azille was talking about, the kinds of spaces one inhabits. I'm going to be so real as well, like porn, like actually thinking about like different categories other than Sean Cody. And I mean, a big part of that is about, I come from like an anthropology and dance background, and a lot of what we do is about embodiment, right? So if you're gonna do an embodied act like masturbate to porn, you might as well try and engineer it so that it broadens your sexual appetites, I would think, if that's something that you're interested in. And another part of it has also been, I have like very romantic friendships, and the majority of my friends are Black and queer and lovely and beautiful. And there's a deep intimacy and romance there that allowing myself to experience as romance has helped to kind of, I don't know, alleviate this kind of pressure of seeking this perfect partner that also for Black queer people has to be a white man, right? The way that the media is oriented pushes us in that direction. The way that the social landscape of South Africa is oriented it pushes us in this kind of direction. So trying to want something different is quite an active process. And so these kind of like embodied enactments of feeling very romantically connected to my friends who are very Black and queer, watching porn that is not just Sean Cody. Yeah, these would be the ways.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Alistair, you mentioned it in your introduction of the book that you write an interracial couple, and it's such a. I mean, you have a lot of these stories are just like, I get to the end and I'm like, why couldn't it be a happy ending? And it's like not a sad ending, it's just an ending, and I'm like, no. But I think that you found a way to represent two very particular population groups, class groups in that. How do you go about like getting that experience, getting that perspective, and how important is it for you to represent those kinds of things?
These are the tough questions. Okay, thank you. That story is called Why Don't South Africans Read Fiction? And the basic premise is that we have an empathy problem, and we don't want to imagine what it's like to be someone who's very different from ourselves, because we've been so pigeonholed by our history, and that, you know, like if you're like a wealthy white woman, you don't want to imagine what it's like to be poor and Black, and vice versa. And so this couple, in the context of that being the title of the story, and an issue that the white character in this is grappling with because he writes fiction, he's in a relationship with a Black man, and yeah, I guess, I don't know how I got that across. I guess I often feel that oof that you're talking about. I think there's so much misunderstanding and miscommunication that goes on. Because we have to be more conscious about trying to like break free of like the prisons that we've inherited. I really loved what you said about having like romantic friendships. Sorry, this is going off script a bit, but like, I guess when I was thinking about like what queerness teaches us about intimacy, like when I was thinking about this panel, I was like, well, I think straight life, the straight world is everything is so policed, right? Like you've got gender roles are so policed, and you've got to perform a certain way. And if you get married, then the woman does this and the man does this. And even like friendships, like men aren't allowed to be intimate with other men because that's gay, but they also can't be intimate with women because that's like, what is that saying about them? And can men and women be friends? Which is such a weird question to me as a queer person. I'm like, well, you're just going to write off half the population of the world because oh, I might be attracted to them. Like, so what? You can work with that. You can either give into it or resist it or whatever, but you don't have to like. So, sorry, that was a weird tangent, but. That story, I guess, I don't ever have the answers. I guess that's the joy of writing fiction, is I don't know what the answer is. I guess in that story, I was just trying to explore what it feels like to love someone very deeply and still feel like there's a part of them that you can't grasp because of how different your lives have been, and how tragic that is, but also beautiful when they are able to reach through to each other and experience something together.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
That was beautiful.
It really was. I just actually now from the Lucky Ones, the title track, if you will. There's a really great line in there where you talk about the Europeans who come here for holiday. I hope they're not in here, and describe them as swallows. You know, people who get to live without context, a world free of context. And I found that really, I definitely highlighted that one because it's, I I think when you look at queerness, you have to look at white supremacy, you have to look at apartheid, you have to look at how that informed gender and preferences. And the politics of preferences, something that you talk about, and how notions like the black peril, how that affected desire and notions of masculinity as well, and black masculinity and black femininity. I'd love for you to expand on that if you can.
So this is a very upsetting part of apartheid history that is still really with us today. It's a long story. I'm going to try to explain it really quickly. So the project of apartheid is to keep the white nation separate. You want pure white babies, so you want the white woman at no cost to be sleeping with the black man. You also want a black labor force that's really exploitable and exploited, and you also want to police space. Now, all of that comes together. You keep the white woman away from the black man, you control the black population, you put everyone, both women and black people, under extreme surveillance if you can convince everyone that the black man is an extreme sexual threat to the white woman. So, at times, and it's really interesting, the historians trace this. Every time in apartheid history when there was a disconnect in white Afrikaner kind of solidarity, like when the mine workers were striking against, when the white mine workers were striking against the white mine bosses, these narratives of the black peril would start circulating in the media. And what that entailed was like spates of stories of black men raping white women. But when you go look at the statistics and the actual data and the actual court cases, this did not really happen. Much more rape was happening with white men raping black women. So it's this thing of, if you can convince everyone that the black man is the sexual threat, then you manage to control the black population, you bring the white population together against the common enemy, you keep the white women under surveillance and apart, so it works for everyone. And we still see this working in our neighborhoods today. If you look at the white neighborhoods, the neighborhood watches, how there's a kind of hysteria about the black man walking in the street, and the implicit subtext there is always that our women are in danger to be raped here. So it's that, it's attaching a certain kind of affective feel like a thing around a black man's sexuality that works in everyone's favor in the white supremacist nation. Yeah.
And it's really like, the impact that it's felt, not just to black men, but to black women as well, was very eye-opening to see where that traces back to.
And maybe it's important to mention that. So. And this is Pumlakola's work. She shows that because black men are then painted as almost naturally violent and naturally prone to rape, then what's happening to black women, when they get raped, it's not taken seriously, because it's like, this is just what black men do, and black women choose to be with black men, and also because white men are doing so much raping, so then it's just, in the end, Pumlakola's term is that black women become unrapeable in the eyes of the law, that nothing that is done to them is seen as rape because of how they are positioned in this gender scheme of apartheid. So it's extremely violent and extremely harmful, and this is what she argues is still behind the problem of sexual violence in South Africa today. That it's not taken seriously enough by law and by,
I want to move on to family. The concept of family, and how queerness, just the origins of the nuclear family, and how queerness challenges that. So I'd love to know what the notion of family means to you as a writer, and how that comes through in your work. How did you represent those? Because there were several, each story had its own little mini family, and how have you communicated that through your work?
That's for me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
actually, I just want to contextualize this first.
Okay.
The concept of the nuclear family. Azille, you go into that really well in terms of the project of control and of land ownership. Could you just expand on just how it relates to class and to property and all of that?
So, white people come here as settlers, and they want to justify their ownership of land. They want, in some way, to say that the land is ours, and in some kind of God-given way, we haven't stolen it. And what's the easiest way to do that is to say it's through the, what would be the English rule of primogeniture? Eerstgeboorterecht, like land being passed from father to son, from father to son. And that gives it a kind of existential weight and the weight of time that wasn't at that point. I mean, the settlers were coming in all the time new. So your little nuclear family through which the white babies, the white line is produced, becomes a way through which to legitimize white land ownership and to give it, gravity and meaning. So then as soon as if you have a queer son or a queer daughter, that line goes out the window, and the land cannot be passed on. So it's an issue of being here on the land. Queerness threatens that, which is fascinating if you think. But I mean, we can think of the fear in white Afrikaner imagination about this, and then it makes sense. Yeah. So,
what I love about all of these is that there's a call to reimagine, right, across all of these. And in the context of family, how do you feel you reimagine family to like as a concept to be through your work or in your personal life or just vibes, just in your head? You want to talk about it because I think it's so important in the concept of wealth and race and land ownership particularly, and how important it is for us to reimagine a way of being in community with each other.
I need to premise this with I'm not an academic, so I hope I don't sound dumb in comparison to everything. But I think on top of like that, which is super interesting, I also think there's just stuff around like care and caregiving. So back to like the gender roles thing, is that I think one of the things that queerness can do is that frees us from all of that nonsense, right? In terms of like assuming this person's going to do that kind of role. I think so many families are set up on that unvoiced expectation of this is how the woman's going to behave, this is how the father's going to behave. So I think queer families, whether they are, in kind of paired up or in a polyamorous situation or whatever it is, I think there's a way in which queerness just gives us the distance to see these power structures more clearly and maybe to be more conscious of what the unexpressed like expectations of one another are, so that we can maybe grapple with those in a kinder way. I hope that's what queerness makes available to us as like people embarking on intimacy and embarking on trying to create some kind of relationships with one another, right? Whether it's in a smaller family or a larger group of friends.
Yeah. Maybe to pick up on what Azille was saying and tie it in maybe with yours, because I was thinking when Azille was talking about the Eerstgeboorterecht, which for me is connected to the doctrine of discovery, which was this kind of, in the Catholic churches in Europe, this was a document that was drafted to give the right to the first discoverers of a territory ownership of that territory, because the people that were found there were not considered people because they were not godly. So there's this combination of the white man's burden or like manifest destiny that is interwoven into this Eerstgeboorterecht. And I thought that was important because when thinking about queering family dynamics, immediately I thought of this church that I'm a part of, as I talk about porn, Jesus. Great representation. But it's a really beautiful church. It's called We Are Church. Their tagline is safe, seen, and celebrated. So I'm healing my religious trauma through, but they're really fantastic people. I met one of the ministers at a pro-Palestine rally, and he was like, we've got church in 2 days. And I was like, see you there. And it's why I think about that in terms of queering family is because the way that the church is arranged, there's like money if people need transport to get to it's not even a church, it's just a school that we meet in. So that people collect money for this, and there's also a kind of like informal refugee clinic that they run, so like trying to get people through the asylum process. And why I'm mentioning this is because it queers the expectations that we would have of our immediate family, and it extends those into a community, so everyone is involved. And I mean, this WhatsApp group is alive, guys. Because yeah, you have people, refugees that are in prison, and some of the ministers are trying to get them out, and the police say that they don't have the keys, human rights violation. And there are people that are injured, that we put the names in the WhatsApp group, and there's a prayer group around it. So I find it quite interesting to think of what the original intentions of the church were, and how people have taken the Gospels and not really queered them, because if you're a Christian and you don't believe and enact justice, I find it hard for you to understand yourself as a Christian then if we look at the life of Jesus Christ. And there's something quite queer about that, because Jesus was meant to be a symbol of ultimate whiteness, of ultimate, authority, right? And using his authority to sequester land and to remove indigenous people and to subjugate women and to take all of that and to really flip its usage to what it is, how it is expressed in the Gospels is quite. I've had an experience of kind of queer familiarity in that environment where we kind of share the responsibility of care with people that are largely strangers, which is also like, even the nuclear family is like your most familiar stranger, so that's not so far out of the realm of imagination. So yeah, that would be, funnily enough, the queerest family that I found is in the church.
I love it. I need to go heal my religious trauma. All right, guys, we have just under 15 minutes for some questions. If anyone has any questions for any of the authors. Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm Elias, looking at you.
Hello, just two quick questions. The first is for Alistair. Alistair, I think it's your last story, or the second last story, is called The Witch, and it actually deals quite nicely with like what happens when you actually step outside of this kind of idea, this very structured idea of family, and specifically white supremacist family, I guess. So maybe you can talk a bit about that. And my other question was about religion and gayness or queerness, which was really interesting. For my thinking process was this, is that for a lot of people, for a lot of Christian people, punishment is going to happen in the next life, right? There's this idea of hell. And that actually means that we're actually less retributive in this life, and don't exact like revenge or whatever the case may be. The idea is that it's passed on later. And that made me think that like maybe queerness, like hell is here quite often for a lot of queer people, and they experience it, and so we're very intentional about creating a version of heaven here. And I wondered if you could just reflect on that.
So on The Witch, yeah, thank you for that. It's quite literally takes place at the point in which these colonial structures are spreading across South Africa. So that story is set at the colonial frontier in the 1700s in the Tsitsikamma rainforest. And the protagonist of that story is a woman who has fled her husband. She's got an abusive husband. She is unable to have children, and so she flees his domestic abuse, and she runs into the forest, and she establishes a relationship with these two children. And the original thinking of that was actually taking the story of Hansel and Gretel and flipping the perspective. I wanted to tell the perspective of like these women who are like brandished or like branded as witches. Like it's a very particular perspective, and I know in Europe it had a history of like it was almost like an anti-feminist backlash as women were becoming more stronger and independent, and its way of controlling them. And so there's this idea that like just because you're a strong woman who doesn't have children and is kind of making your own way in the world and choosing what is right for you, then society brandishes you as a witch, and we're like, we can't trust this person, she's up to no good. So in my story, she's actually a pretty decent person, and she's trying to give these children love, and it's supposed to just be this mental exercise of like, whose perspective are we in when we ever hear a story? Why is the person being portrayed in that way?
Yeah, and maybe to jump off the witch allegory. So in my research, there was this concept that came up called the stand between people. I think it comes from Will Roscoe, who's a queer cultural theorist, and he was talking about how queer people in different places in the world often are those people that are on the peripheries of society. But they have what he calls a socio-sexual function, the socio-sexual function of queerness, which is to bring the fringe information from the peripheries to the center. So there is a functionality to that the sexual desire, the sexuality, which I think of the witch because the witch is often the one who lives on the periphery. And there's a similar demonization that happens with queer people and with witches. And what's interesting in this moment right now, the past few years, is like upsurge in like astrology and tarot amongst the queers. Like they're remembering that they're witches again, which is great. And everyone's forming covens, which we love, having sex under the full moon. But yeah, so there's an interesting connection there, and that I think it's so beautiful what you said about trying to bring heaven on earth, because it also makes me think of this concept from Buddhism, bodhisattvas, which is basically people that make a spiritual choice to remain incarnated in this kind of in this world, let's say, because there's the other processes of enlightenment that would allow you to leave. Well, this is the belief system. So when I think of bodhisattvas, basically it's this choice to endure suffering for the betterment of society. And there's something about queerness. I don't want to like elevate us to like angelic status because they are terrible gays, for real. Just go to Crew any night. Is Crew even a thing? Didn't they close? Anyway, sorry.
Pink.
But yes, so there is a way in which I don't want to make our suffering a utility, but it does bring beautiful things into the world. And somehow there is this connection of queer people that have experienced a lot of cruelty, and not just queer people in the sense of sexuality, because I think there's a way in which we can read queerness as racial, as economic, like thinking about the queerness of blackness is something that I find quite stimulating, and how there is so much revelation that is brought through those experiences. So I don't want to romanticize suffering, but at the same time, I do think there is a beautiful benefit, not to the suffering, but what we do with it, and what we are willing, or how we are willing to make that extend beyond ourselves for the benefit of whoever might come after, whoever is in our kind of proximity, which for me is really kind of like a telltale sign of queerness, in a sense. Yeah.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Hi. Hello.
Whoever has thoughts on this, but kind of the idea of women and their attachment to cisgender heteronormativity, but the reality of their experience being one of like queerness, kind of like what you were saying, where queerness isn't just in like sexuality or gender, it's also, where people are in the peripheries. And I just wanted to see any of your thoughts about that kind of, I don't know, because if I tell people like, oh, I think in general, like being a woman, being gendered as a woman, that is, I have almost like a conspiracy level thing about being like, that's the beginning there. That's where it all started. Because we harken back and be like, this is how it's always been. But I'm like, I'm not so sure. And I feel like that's part of, the beginning of like oppressive structures along with, all the others. But women, when I talk to women, they're like, we're straight. We're not part of that experience. We're not experiencing that suffering, and they don't frame it for themselves in that way, in the same way that like queer people, come together and be like, this is our struggle. So yeah, that's.
I can give a stab. While you were talking, I was thinking of Silvia Federici's Caliban and the Witch, which is this text by this Italian feminist, which is about basically debunking the burnings of the witches that happened in the kind of 1400s, 1500s in Western Europe. And basically she was talking about much of what Azille was talking about, this kind of Eerste Geboorterecht, where pagans and heretics who were non-Christians, they had different traditions, so it was possible for a woman to own her land after her father passed, if she is the oldest or whatever the case may be. And you also have these women who were medicine workers, so they were kind of like providing abortions, where this kind of mythology of witches stealing babies kind of come from, or is theorized to come from. And I guess the reason I was thinking about that was because what Federici points to is something similar to what you're pointing to, that there's something primordial about the genderedness or gendering as a tool of domination. I don't think I'm in a position to say, woman, you are oppressed by your gender identity. But I hear what you're saying, and I think it's quite complicated because if I think about it in, I think it was Alistair who was saying that like queerness gives us possibilities and it makes us question to the fundament of what we think is true. So even something like identifying as a woman becomes a question, right? This is what happened for me when I came into queerness, and then everything became a question. My gender identity, my sexuality, I thought I was some gay boy, but it's like, I like everything, which is great. And also my gender was something that became a question. And I think there is an imperative to maintain the illusion of the fixity of identity in order for oppressive systems to work, right? So what Azille was talking about, this fixity of maintaining the Afrikaner identity for purposes of societal reproduction, like this belief that if we don't do this, this race dies out. I think there is something very similar to the gender formulation and about the necessity of having such a category as, I think we see it in the conversation around trans women and the kind of incredibly oppressive legislature that is being released mostly in the Western world against trans women because they question this question of what it means to be, which is such an old question. Simone de Beauvoir, what's this queen's name? I forget, but Ain't I a Woman? Sojourner Truth. So there's something very integral. And one last thing, sorry, I'm being very long-winded now. One thing that I do remember, I was at a talk of Gayatri Spivak it was at UCT in Jamison Plaza, and she said exactly what you said. She said that the oppression of women and even the creation of this category is the fulcrum through much of which oppressive structures move. And like you were saying, without the woman, there is no Volk, right? And I think that's an incredibly important thing to take quite seriously when these systems are thinking about how it is that they are going to organize us. I don't know what that means. I cannot really say definitively what that would mean for the woman category, but I think you've touched on something that's very important and very explosive, and I'm trying to be very careful with it.
Damn. I really want to ask you to expand on something, but I'm just going to inform you that Azille has a really great like reflections on these and like the questions that you ask. I like that you don't give us any solutions. I mean, I hate that actually. I would love a solution, but you ask the question, and it's such a great challenge. Like, how else can we exist, and what it means to live a feminist life now. And I just want to softly plug that, you know, there's someone who has written this so beautifully, and I really love how you just imagine, and just the notion of taking away or the redistribution of wealth and land, how that can just open us up to reimagine, you know, if survival weren't tied to this capitalist, you know, land ownership that's patriarchal. And just how much that could free us and liberate us in terms of desire and family and how we live.
You say it so nicely.
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you very much for writing it so beautifully. Made me weep. Guys, this has been really lovely. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you guys so much for sharing your work and for coming here and chatting. Thank you to OpenBookFest. Guys, please go Jesus Thesis and other critical fabulations. Desire at the end of the white line. The lucky ones.
Yeah.